Chief Executive of Big Society Capital, and it's great to be. This is actually my fourth visit to the West Midlands for this fair. And I've said this before, and I say it again. I think Melanie really sets the standard, and Social Enterprise West Midlands really sets the standard in terms of its level of organisation, its ability to bring people together, and to encourage partnerships. And I think that's why, as I will talk about later, why the West Midlands, there are a whole host of different examples in the West Midlands where social investment and social enterprise and social investment in social enterprises are really beginning to make a difference to people's lives. So I thought what I would do, and my job I suppose is to keep speaking until the Minister arrives, which I'll see to do. But I thought what I would do is I'd give you some sort of sense, high-level sense of how Big Society Capital is doing and what we've been doing. And I want to talk broadly about what our medium longer-term strategy is, and illustrate that hopefully with some real examples from here in the West Midlands where transactions have really taken place. And then talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are that we face going forward as we try to build a broader and more robust social investment market. So I think the good news is that BSC, as you know, was set up to build a social investment market, and we were capitalised and are capitalised with dormant accounts and with some additional money from the large UK banks. And to date, we've received about £250 million from our two funding sources. We have committed, and as you remember, as most of you know, we're a wholesaler, so we don't commit directly to frontline organisations. We commit to intermediaries. Many of the intermediaries to whom we have committed are represented here. But of the £250 million that we have received, we've committed to date about £175 million to about 30 different organisations around the country. And I think that is making a really meaningful difference in a whole host of different ways. In April of 2012, when we were set up, and indeed around about the time, I think the first time we did the fair here was in October 2011, which was before we even got going. But when we started and opened formally in April of 2012, there was less than £20 million available for social enterprises who wish to borrow money or receive investment. Today, there's over £200 million in the hands of the intermediary, of a whole range of intermediaries. As I say, most of those intermediaries are represented here. In April of 2012, if you looked around the UK for social investment intermediaries that had pools of capital, pools of investment funds greater than, say, £10 million, you pretty much found nobody. Today, there are at least 4 or 5 intermediaries that have funds in excess of £25 million. If you looked around the UK in April 2012, you found one example of a social impact bond that was up and running. Today, there are about 15 examples of social impact bonds that are up and running, and in the next 6 months or so, we'll see another 10 or so. If you looked around the UK in 2012 at the dedicated social lenders, for a charity bank as an example, you found that in many cases they were short of capital in an environment where capital was becoming, regulators were forcing them to raise more and more capital. Today you find social lenders such as Charity Bank who are now well capitalized and are able, in a position to significantly expand their loan book. So there are a whole host of different ways. The other thing you see now is, which is pertinent to what Melanie mentioned, is in at least 2 places, this Northeast and in Scotland, there are dedicated regional social enterprise funds that are channeling money to local social enterprises. In both of those cases were examples of where Big Society Capital worked, in one case with Northern Rock Foundation, and in the other case with the Scottish Government to set those funds up. So I'd reinforce what Melanie said. I mean, I'm going to talk in a minute about some of the very real things that are happening here. So I think the West Midlands has really led the way in a whole host of different areas, but there is a real need here for a dedicated, locally based, regionally focused investment fund. and we would be very anxious and pleased to be able to find a partner to work with on that. As we look at, as I said initially, Big Society Capital's role is to build a social investment market. And we sort of stepped back, I guess, about 6 or 9 months ago and tried to really understand strategically what does that mean and what you have to do. Because I think one of our frustrations had been that different people have different views on what a robust social investment market means. And those views are generally driven by the type of activities that you're involved in, the type of people you're trying to reach, and the type of funding that you need. And I think on reflection, we realized that there were probably 4 different sort of strategic, objectives that we had as BSC. One was to support innovation in the type of innovation particularly in early intervention that social enterprises are so good at. Another one was to try to bring scale into this market. So what had been a very fragmented, rather small market, still important to support the smaller social enterprises. But in addition, we had to bring in more help to try and leverage in more meaningful forms of capital. The third one is we had to find a way to connect small and medium-sized enterprises with capital, particularly, I might say, small, medium-sized social organizations, charities and social enterprises with capital. And the fourth one was to try and build a broader participation market that brought in the man and woman in the street that helped to provide funding for smaller community-based initiatives. So those were sort of the 4 broad streams that we had. And just let me talk a little bit about what's been happening in the West Midlands, specifically in those areas. Because I think there is, as I said, a lot of very interesting case studies here. And these are all the things I've mentioned have been launched in the last 12 months. And to go to, again, to Melanie's point, the sense of momentum and real substance that's developing around social investment, and this, I think is very well illustrated here. So in terms of providing funding, if you like, for innovative solutions, we have supported an organization called DEREC, which stands for Developing and Empowering Resources in Communities. They have provided funding to an organization called Friends and Neighbours, which operates in Sandwell. What Friends and Neighbours does is it leverages volunteers to go and work and spend time with older and more vulnerable people. That is Friends and Families now has received funding to allow it to take on more volunteers, reach more individuals in Sandwell. Wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have gotten the funding from DEREC, and DEREC wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have got the funding from Big Society Capital. In addition, on sort of more innovative support for more innovative solutions, Birmingham has recently announced a social impact bond. It became the second local authority in the UK to announce a social impact bond focused on children at risk of going into care. Worcestershire County Council is tendering for a social impact bond focused on social isolation. So these are, again, cases of projects that would not be happening if we didn't have this support for innovation and the funding available to support it. The charity bank, which has, as I said, received a significant injection of capital from Big Society Capital, is very active. And one of the great things about charity banks, everywhere I go in the country when I speak to meetings like this, the charity bank are always represented, and they are a key part of the sort of lending infrastructure to social organisations. They're very active here in the West Midlands, most recently making loans for a skate park in Stourbridge. And again, that provision to organisations like that, not-for-profit skate park, would be very difficult for those organisations to get a loan from any commercial lender. The charity bond market, which is one of our principal ways of bringing scale, larger amounts of capital into social investment. Midlands Together, working with Triadis, raised £3 million to help refurbish and empty properties using principally ex-offenders to do that. Most recently, Golden Lane Housing, which is an offshoot of Mencap, raised £12 million in a bond offering, which was the largest of its type, also managed by Triodos. Was the largest of its type. £12 million is a pretty significant amount of money, and £12 million is going to make a real difference to a lot of disabled people around this country and their ability to live in suitable and appropriate accommodation. So that's, and I think we'll talk a bit more, I think, later on about the charity bond market. But certainly for those of you who run larger charities or are looking for larger amounts of capital, that is now a very real alternative for fundraising, which it really wasn't before. On the community side, we've supported directly the Community Investment Fund, which is run by Social and Sustainable Capital. We've supported Community Shares Underwriting Fund, all of which are directed at trying to increase the size and help catalyze the growth of the community shares market. And again, in the West Midlands, you've had a number of examples of successful community share offerings, particularly in the solar space, solar energy space. So the hospital in Leamington Spa raised money through a community shares offer. The community centre in Malvern raised money through a community share offer. So you can see that there are, again, all of the examples that I mentioned here in the West happened here in the West Midlands, and they all happened in the last 12 months. So you can see how what we talked about, as Melanie mentioned, when we were here 4 years ago, I think there was, we had, I think, an interesting story to tell. We had significant political backing at the time through Nick Hurd and through the government, but we didn't really have a lot of tangible cases that we could point to where social investment had really been accessed in a meaningful way by charities and social enterprises, and where it was really being seen to touching people's lives. And I think what's changed over the 4 years as we've come back year after year is that what started as a good idea with not a lot of substance behind it is increasingly becoming a good idea that has real substance and real examples that we can point to. And I suspect when we're back here next year and the year after, we'll have a whole host of additional examples. Now, so I think we feel at Big Society Capital very positive about how things have moved forward. It has not, however, been without its challenges. And I think I want to just talk about a few of those challenges, because I think we all have a part to play in sort of helping to overcome those. I think we have a communication challenge on social investment. I think we find as we go around the country, organizations, charities and social enterprises becoming increasingly knowledgeable about how they can access it. But I still think there is a certain sense of frustration that it's not available to everybody. I think it has been positioned by some as being an alternative to grants. It has been positioned by some as somehow being a substitute for austerity. It's neither of those things. It's a totally new. It's a new form of funding. It's capital. It's not income. It doesn't work for every social organization and every charity, and it only works in those situations where there's a real revenue model that you can point to that allows you to, or the organization, to actually repay the money. And I think we all have, led by BSC, a need to do a better job in illustrating, helping all those people that can access social investment understand how they can do it and what it means, but also equally importantly, articulating to those for whom it is not appropriate why it's not appropriate. I think so. Communication is one thing. I think there's a cultural challenge, and Melanie's initiative today to try to sign up more individuals with specific financial expertise to bring them onto boards of trustees is a very important one. I mean, there's a natural and legitimate conservative approach to trustees and who are responsible for social organizations, and that conservative approach will often extend to whether or not they're prepared to take on loan finance. And so I think, again, with the caveat that it is not appropriate for many organizations to take on loans. It is appropriate for some, and for many of those, it can make a material difference to the impact they're having in their community. We want them to be comfortable doing that. We want them to understand what they're doing, and trustees play a critical role in that. So I think we need to help educate trustees better, and I think to appropriately change the culture in certain cases. We also need to identify more social entrepreneurs. I mean, there's many people in this room who would, I'm sure, define themselves as social entrepreneurs. Many people doing that very successfully. All the people that are providing lunch here are examples of great social entrepreneurs. We need more of those people. We need to encourage a great spirit of social entrepreneurship. There are a couple of organizations, Unlimited or one, Clearly So or another, that are doing a fantastic job of actually identifying and working with these entrepreneurs, and we need to do more of that. We also need to address those areas of the market where social investment doesn't work on its own. So there are many organizations. I think what we've done at BSC has provided a number of different places where you can go if you want to raise £500,000. And for many of you, that's very good news. But of course, for many of you, you don't want to raise £500,000. You want to raise £50,000 or £100,000. And to a large extent, it is very difficult for lenders to provide those sort of loans in a prudent way at a price that you can afford and also be sustainable. And those loans, those smaller loans targeted at community organizations, can make a huge difference in communities around the country. So we've been working very closely with the government, with the Cabinet Office, with the Big Lottery Fund to try and find ways where we can put together a blend of grants and loans to address that smaller loan market. And we're hopeful within the next couple of months we'll see more specific announcements around that. I think another challenge that we face is around cost. And over and over again, I hear that social investment is expensive. It's expensive principally because the costs of actually, the legal costs associated with actually taking on investment are more than a typical, particularly small social enterprise can afford to pay. So I think we have to do a better job of standardizing loan documentation and working across the different providers of loans to make sure that the funding they're providing is not only easier to access, but is also cheaper for you to access. And then finally, I think we have work to do on the commissioning side. I mean, it is still a fact that the biggest single opportunity for charities and social enterprises in this country from a revenue perspective is doing work on behalf of the government and the local authorities, commissioned and procured by them. We have been working very closely with the MOJ on the Transforming Rehabilitation Program. I think that has helped us much better understand the difficulties and challenges faced, not just actually by social organizations, but also by any small and medium-sized organization in actually getting a decent slice of those programs. So I think it's our responsibility to continue to try to work and represent the social sector to try to not only provide easier access to finance, but also to try to get some flexibility in the way these programs are structured to make it easier for social organizations to be more competitive in winning them. So those are a few of the challenges. As I said, this is the fourth time I've been here in the West Midlands, the fourth time that Melanie's done this fantastic job of organizing this fair. And I do really feel that we have gone from a point where it's really been, if you like, promises and rhetoric, to a point where we can really, as I say, point to real substance, not only in the people that are the intermediaries, that are the lenders and the investors that are here, that are represented here, but also on the ground with real organizations that are actually benefiting from capital. There's a lot more to do. I think that the principal what we need most of all, I suppose, if we're going to successfully build this market over the next couple of years, is first of all partnership. I think one of the things we've learned over the last 3 years is that growing this market and creating a situation where this funding can make a real difference at the front line requires a different type of partnership to certainly normal commercial financing markets, and I think also a different type of partnership to the normal grant market. And so we've been working with government, with the lottery, with local authorities, with charities, with foundations, with housing associations, social enterprises, a very broad range of groups to try to put in place a new form of partnership which allows us to reach a much broader group of frontline organizations and help them significantly broaden the value that they're bringing. And I think finally that the other thing that we need in growing this market is patience, because market building does take a long time. It would be much easier to just be much looser and less rigorous about the decisions we make. That would never build a market. It would lead to a permanent reliance on, frankly, government funding. And I think what we're trying to get away from here is this idea that the only way that the only potential funder for social organizations is through government.